Well, hi there. This is one of the most controversial dinosaur skeletons ever found. Nanotyrannus. Maybe. Because Nanotyrannus might just be a juvenile Tyrannosaurus rex. In fact, that has been the conventional wisdom and accepted position of the paleontological community for a long time. But not anymore. And fortunately, I happen to be friends with a paleontologist that specializes in tyrannosaurs. My friend Ethan, who has known about these findings for a very long time now, but has been waiting until the paper was published to talk about it. Well, the paper is now published, and it's probably the biggest thing to happen in dinosaur paleontology in a long time. Which is saying a lot, as the world of dinosaur paleontology is exploding at the moment. But this is a big moment because one of the most contentious and exciting dinosaur species just came back from the dead. And it brought a friend along with it. So Ethan, thank you so much for being here.
Thanks for having me.
So before we get into these most recent findings, will you give us a bit of background about what Nanotyrannus is, what we knew about it before this study, and why there was reason to doubt that Nanotyrannus was a unique genera?
Absolutely. So I think that's important because what we're about to lay out for you is probably the greatest drama within paleontological study, maybe of all time.
Even more than Spinosaurus?
Even more than Spinosaurus, maybe. Spinosaurus is its own battle. But it is a decades-long debate. And to start, we have to go back to the world of Robert Bacher and Phil Currie when they discovered, or I guess reanalyzed, a specimen that had been previously noted as a Gorgosaurus. Now, if you know Tyrannosaurs, Gorgosaurus is a large but lightly built tyrannosaur from the late Cretaceous but before T-Rex. Okay. However, upon further analysis, they looked at this skull, now known as the Cleveland specimen, and that's important for later, and realized it was not from the same time as Gorgosaurus. In fact, it wasn't Gorgosaurus at all. They called it Nanotyrannus lencensis. Now, Nanotyrannus refers to the kind of small size of the animal itself in comparison to its contemporaries. It translates to tiny tyrant. Lencensis translating to of the Lance Formation, which is of equal status to the Hell Creek, which again we will get into later. Now, how they describe Nanotyrannus is a small, lightly built tyrannosaur, roughly around 17 feet long, potentially weighing over 1,000 pounds. Now, by our standards today, that's massive. But compared to the animals it lived with, aka Tyrannosaurus rex, it was dwarfed. This was the coyote to T-Rex's wolf, if that makes sense. Absolutely. Related, but much smaller, built for different prey. They noted that it had shallow, low-hanging jaws that were very narrow, full of much more thin, lithe, serrated teeth. It had proportionally longer arms and hands with differently shaped claws. And obviously, it was much smaller than T-Rex itself. And so that is our introduction into Nanotyrannus. And they discovered what is now known as the Cleveland skull. Now, the Cleveland skull is a specimen that's very important. In fact, let's go ahead and I just told you this is the greatest drama, potentially within all of paleontology. So let's get our cast here. Yeah. These are three names that are going to be important for people to understand as we tell this story. Starting with the Cleveland skull. The Cleveland skull is the holotype. Now, a holotype is the first and name-bearing specimen within a genus. So what that means is it was the one that the entire name is erected upon. It is the one that when we find another one, we compare to make sure it is that same species. The Cleveland skull is our holotype of Nanotyrannus lencensis. Okay. So, moving on, we then have Jane. This is Jane right here. Jane is another Nanotyrannus that was found later, and honestly, I will refer to them as she because of the name Jane. We do not actually know the sex of Jane. However, Jane is who has borne most of the brunt of the Nanotyrannus debate for decades. And most of the contention has fallen upon Jane, and that is another important wrinkle in this story. And then...
So this is one contentious skull.
This is one very hotly debated skull for decades. And then, lastly, we have Bloody Mary or Warhammer, which is the dueling dinosaurs specimen.
And I'll ask you more about them later.
We'll talk about them later. But those are three names that are very important, and they are all, at least under this paper, now considered Nanotyrannus. Those are important names to think about when we're talking about Nanotyrannus.
Can you tell me, like, what portion of Jane we have?
So the Cleveland skull is largely that, a skull. There is some postcrania. I'm not super familiar with what else we have, but it is a very good skull.
Okay.
And that is why it is referred to as the Cleveland skull.
And skulls are extremely important when it comes to identifying
Another
animals.
important wrinkle within the Cleveland skull is the fact that it is articulated shut. So the jaws are sealed shut. And because it's so perfectly preserved, it's never been prepared with the jaws open. Now, it has now been CT scanned, which is, again, going to come back and be important later. But for a long time, that was part of this mystery. Then we had Jane. Jane was discovered and was larger than the Cleveland skull. And both of them are juveniles.
Okay.
Both of them are not full-grown animals.
And how do we know that?
A few different things. There is an important study called histology, which we'll talk about later. But also, there is, you guys are probably familiar with the concept of a baby soft spot, which is basically a baby's skull in humans hasn't fully fused, and so there's a soft spot that kind of leads directly to the brain on top of the head. Now, in dinosaurs, that ran down their entire vertebral column.
Okay.
The spinuous process, which is the top part of the vertebrae, was not fully fused onto the centrum, which is the ball part of the vertebrae that sockets onto the next one. And until they reached sexual maturity, that was not fully fused.
And that's when it fused.
And that was when it was fused.
Okay.
Jane here did not have fully fused vertebrae, and her histology, which again we will return to, suggested she was only between 12 to 14 years old.
Okay. And you can tell that those are like growth rings, right?
Yes.
Where it slows down during...
Yes.
Okay.
And again, we will go very in-depth into histology and what that looks like in very shortly here.
Perfect.
But so Jane was confirmed to be a juvenile. So
she's much bigger, but still grown.
Yes.
Okay.
She's slightly larger than the other two specimens, but both of them are young.
Okay.
Which is an important part of this story.
Yes.
Because you then followed up with, so now we have our cast. We, again, remember, Jane, the Cleveland skull, and the dueling dinosaur specimen, a.k.a. Bloody Mary, which is how I will refer to that specimen going forward.
Okay.
Now, the hard part, there were other Nanotyrannus found. The hard part is all of them appeared to be juveniles, or too fragmentary to tell.
Okay.
And upon further study, we did not understand Tyrannosaur ontogeny. Ontogeny is the study of growth within a species. And so there was this huge question. We had other juvenile Tyrannosaurs, but we had no juvenile T-Rex within the Hell Creek and Lance formations.
Which is odd, because there's a lot of
There's a lot of T-Rex, but there weren't babies. And so all of a sudden we were finding these juveniles of what was considered another species, and they seemed to kind of perfectly fit the big what's that Pokemon question mark silhouette we had of what a juvenile T-Rex should look like. So in 1999, a study led by Dr. Thomas Carr, proposed that the missing T-Rex juveniles were actually the juveniles that we had of Nanotyrannus. And the debate was off to the races.
Yeah.
It has from there become the most hotly debated topic potentially within all of paleontology. And around, I'd say, I can't remember the exact year of the study, but maybe 2017, 2018, it was considered done. That Nanotyrannus was definitively a juvenile T-Rex. And that was the consensus within academia for a long time.
Yeah.
And that took us to the second part of the play.
This video is sponsored by our friends at Dino Survival. If you're looking for a gift that's, I don't know, not just like another screen or toy that gets ignored in just a couple of days, Dino Survival is a great pick. And just check out these amazing additions coming in the first expansion. Now, I know in the past we have examined some really terrible pop culture media about just dinosaur battles. And while this does involve dinosaur battles, it's not just a dinosaur fight club. It's a journey through the history of life. Every card you see represents a real animal that lived on our planet. Obviously, Dino Survival features a lot of dinosaurs, but it also features other rad ancient reptiles, and soon, Cambrian animals like trilobites and Ice Age animals like saber-toothed cats. And everybody who orders now will secure exclusive discounts on these rad expansions when they come out. The base game, which I love already, doubles as a visual dictionary to dinosaurs. The little dino lover in your life, which might be you, doesn't even have to play it to enjoy it. At least maybe they'll give you a break. There are 65 beautifully human illustrated cards for them to enjoy. For the holidays, you can save 20% when you order 2 or more decks with code CBO20. This is the perfect time to stock up for birthdays or find a game to distract your kids. If you're just picking up one for you or a friend, use CRR10 to get 10% off your order. And standard shipping in the US is included in the price. Give the gift of dinosaurs this year. Make every day prehistoric. Now, as for the why, it seems like you've got a little bit of the situation. I'll ask you more about this later, but with Pachycephalosaurus and Stygimoloch and Dracorex, a big part of the evidence is just that we have no juvenile Pachycephalosaurus.
Yeah, it's a lack thereof of evidence, if anything. And
was that the only reason?
No. So a lot of, and this is another thing we're going to have to talk about later on, but more in more detail, because we're going to get answers to these questions. But a lot of people, even people who considered Nanotyrannus a valid genus, were very convinced that Nanotyrannus was sister to T-Rex. Okay. It was the most closely related animal to T-Rex. And so that already it was considered okay. It's its own, it's even if it's its own thing, it is the closest relative we have to T-Rex and lived with T-Rex. So on top of all of the kind of missing ontogenetic stage evidence that we had, we also had to confront the fact that it was a lot of what we might expect from a juvenile T-Rex. Now, tyrannosaurs were a lot like even modern mammals. They were leggier as juveniles. They were a little bit more lithe. They weren't quite as heavily built. If you look at a pit bull puppy, it's not going to be built like an adult pit bull. Mm-hmm. And so Nanotyrannus seemed to fit the bill for a lot of those anatomical traits.
Okay, so it seems like that's where the scientific community was generally. But if I understand correctly, there was still some doubt. There was still some doubt around, maybe the general consensus in academia, weren't too many people talking about it, but there was still some doubt. Why? What would have been the things that we knew before this most recent study that would still leave us with some doubt?
There were a select few of scientists and paleontologists and fossil hunters and even commercial fossil prospectors who considered Nanotyrannus to be its own valid genus. And the reason for that was partially based off of known commercial specimens, which were kept within private collection. Mm-hmm. And
which included the dueling dinosaurs for a long time.
For a while. Yeah. And that included specimens like hand claws of Nanotyrannus, which appeared to be larger than that of T-Rex.
And absolutely larger, not just relatively larger.
No, correct? Absolutely larger. And so I mean, you held a T-Rex claw up to these potential Nanotyrannus claws, and they were larger than even a full-size adult T-Rex claw. And tooth count remained a question within Nanotyrannus. Nanotyrannus appeared to have much more and much smaller proportional teeth than T-Rex did. And then on top of that, just general skull shape and body build. A lot of people tended to have a hard time imagining the lanky, lithe, cheetah-like Nanotyrannus becoming the gigantic bruiser that was T-Rex within a 6 to 8 year time span.
Mm-hmm.
And so there were a lot of questions. There were also smaller details, things like serration density, which is how many serrations per millimeter there are on a tooth. And people were arguing that that was different in Nanotyrannus than found in T-Rex. And there were a lot of things. However, it ended up kind of getting convoluted into a commercial versus academic paleo debate. And instead of really looking at the science, and that also led to kind of some other issues. And even within academia, it became a very hot button issue, almost like if you're at Thanksgiving dinner and you know your family's hot button topics not to bring up at the table. Nanotyrannus was that. People got into very serious arguments at conferences and online communities. It was a hot topic within paleontology.
And it seems like when you have things like the shape of the eye socket, which is not keyhole shaped in Nanotyrannus, it's round, more typical of everything else on Earth.
Yes.
They've got 15
In
teeth
the
on each
dentary,
side
yes.
in the dentary, and only 12
On
in
T-Rex.
Tyrannosaurus Rex. And the general explanation for this was just that they had a major,
So if we want to go through and,
almost metamorphosis, right?
Yeah. If we want to go through a lot of those individually and kind of counter debates to that, when we go to tooth count, again proposed by Dr. Thomas Carr and his team, was a specific study that talked about crocodilians and talked about this idea that crocodiles did change their tooth count as they grew, and it appeared to be in the same way that tyrannosaurs would have needed to achieve what we see between Nanotyrannus and T-Rex. The idea was that as the teeth became bigger and thicker, it would almost absolve an alveoli, which is the tooth socket, and basically wear down the separation between two and become one with a larger tooth replacing it.
Yeah.
And that is essentially what would have to happen to make Nanotyrannus a T-Rex.
Exactly. And with all the other features, a similar sort of
Exactly.
a metamorphosis.
Within
almost.
arms, it was, the counter argument was, again, essentially puppies. That puppies have larger paws and longer legs in comparison to the adults. So the idea was specimens like
absolutely longer?
Well, the idea was that Jane, just as an adult, would have had larger hands and claws than most other T-Rex. Now, again, this was met with debate because what are the odds that Jane, this teenager, would have just been either some massive T-Rex outclassing the ranks of Scotty and Sue and Celeste and all these other Tyrannosaurs, or at least would have had individual variation-wise much larger arms and hands in comparison to those same T-Rexes. So it was met with debate, but it did seem to be, the consensus was Nanotyrannus was an invalid nomen dubium taxon, and they were just juvenile T-Rex.
Cool.
Until 2025.
Now, I know these dueling dinosaurs.
Mhm.
This is the fossil that really, once we
Changed
got to
everything.
examine it really well for the first time, right?
Yes.
That's what has blown everything up. So will you tell us a little bit about this dueling dinosaurs? Because it is just on its own one of the coolest fossils ever, even if it had nothing to do with this debate.
Oh,
Yeah,
absolutely.
so I want to know more about it.
So the dueling dinosaurs was discovered in 2005 in Montana. It's from the Hell Creek Formation. So again, the Hell Creek, to set our stage a little bit, is going to be the late Cretaceous, 66 to 67 million years ago. And it is where we see some of the most famous dinosaurs. We see Tyrannosaurus rex, we see Nanotyrannus, we see Edmontosaurus, Ankylosaurus, Triceratops, Torosaurus, Dakotaraptor, Chiroraptor, so many more. And it was these are the animals that were present when the meteor crashed into the Earth, right? This is the very end of the dinosaurs, the swan song. And so this block was pulled out of the Hell Creek Formation, the rock layer, from the very end of the dinosaurs in Montana. And it appeared to have what was a 100% complete Triceratops,
Which is remarkable. Like
on its own would have been an astounding specimen.
They look like the Deinonychus in the beginning of Jurassic Park.
Exactly, like a child's dig pit at a museum,
Yes.
not like a real paleontological dig. It is perfect. It is pristine. The bones are all articulated. But on the right of it is a Tyrannosaur. And that Tyrannosaur is now known as Bloody Mary or Warhammer. And that is the specimen that is important for this debate. Now, it was in litigation for a very long time, between it being within private sale, to going on the auction block, to eventually undergoing legal litigation, which then took the majority of the time, until eventually it was sold to the North Carolina Museum for an undisclosed amount of money.
Because I think it was just found by a farmer. And can you
Yes.
imagine finding that?
I can on some level. I can't imagine finding that is because it's unreal.
Yeah.
Even fossils are already a 1 in a million thing. That fossil is 1 in a million amongst 1 in a billion.
And just if any of you know her, please tell Candace Owens that this was found by a farmer and it's one of the raddest double dinosaur skeletons of all time.
And it has completely shifted paleontology. So, from there, this one block called the dueling dinosaurs. Now, to be fair with the dueling dinosaurs, there has been no actual literature on if these animals were engaged in a predator-prey interaction and then fossilized in the middle of it, unlike something like the fighting dinosaurs, which it is not to be confused with, which is a velociraptor and a protoceratops.
We just talked about them last week.
Great. And those animals are known to be engaged in a predator-prey interaction. The dueling dinosaurs, it's unsure, and hopefully further research can confirm this. However, they are in the same block and almost yin-yang with each other.
Yes. But
So-
are they facing away?
They are, they're, if you look at my tattoo, the Triceratops is doing this, the Tyrannosaur is doing the opposite of this. So they're curving away and then back towards each other.
So convenient of you to have brought that
Yes,
tattoo today.
of course. I bring it everywhere I go, just in case. And so, and for a long time, even through litigation and disputes around who owned it and the eventual sale to the North Carolina Museum, it was heavily rumored that this was the specimen that would end the debate. This was the crown jewel.
Well, the Tyrannosaur in there is what, missing one claw?
It is 100% complete. It is not missing a single bone as far as we can tell.
That's incredible.
So, from there, it fell under the very watchful eye of our 2025 paper authors of Lindsay Zano, James Napoli, and the rest of their team. And from there, we enter Act 3 of our dramatic play.
Okay, before we find out if Nanotyrannus is back, I just want to mention that last year Ethan did a guest lecture on dinosaurs at Clint's Life Science Academy as part of our herpetology class. I have never learned so much from a single lecture in my life, as I'm sure you can understand now. Literally, it was the best lecture I have ever attended. And we are now talking about having him teach a full 10-week course. So keep an eye out for that and other courses at clintsreptiles.com/academy if you're into that kind of thing. Okay, so now that this paper is out and you're finally at liberty to talk about it, where do you stand on Nanotyrannus?
I think it is safe for the first time to say that Nanotyrannus is almost certainly a valid genus. In fact, it is not only a valid genus, it is 2 valid species. And let's dive into the why.
Yes.
So again, I want to reiterate, we have Lindsay Zano, James Napoli, and their team to thank for this. This is an astounding paper, and this changes so much about what we know about this specific branch of paleontology. You've mentioned it earlier. I would argue this is one of the most important papers to have come out within the last 10 to 15 years. This, at least within paleontology,
Yeah.
this changes so much. And without their hard research and a lot of other scientists that they are building upon, like the work of people like Robert Bacher, Pete Larson, Phil Curry, we would not be here. And I think it is important that we shout out those names before we dive into the why. I was not even part of this research. I was just in the know of it.
Yeah, you're privy to it.
Yes, exactly. And man, am I grateful, because what a great day to be a Tyrannosaur paleontologist. So, there are a lot of specific anatomical traits that differentiate Nanotyrannus from T-Rex. Now, some we have talked about. For example, some of the bones in the hand, and the hands in general, are nearly twice as large as that of T-Rex, despite having arms around the same size. That would be like me and you having arms around the same size, but my hand being twice as large as yours, and making up this much more of my arm, right? It would be like us having similarly sized arms, but me suddenly having Shaquille O'Neal's hand on my arm, and it obstructing most of my radius ulna.
Yes.
Right. And then we also have the claws. Now, the claws in Nanotyrannus are not only longer than that of T-Rex in absolute size, but they're also differently shaped. T-Rexes are very heavily recurved. They curve back around very sharply. Nanotyrannuses are still very hooked, but they are straighter than that we see in T-Rex. And so that's one part, which we've already mentioned. Then you have something like the tooth count. Now, from there, you might say, well, what about those crocodilians that we were talking about earlier that Thomas Carr mentioned in his paper? Well, James Napoli and his team went back and looked at that original paper, and it appears to be a misunderstanding of a study within crocodilians that showed that there is a very specific pathology that was very common within crocodilomorphs, where one of the lower teeth would overgrow and obstruct into the upper jaw and basically wear out one of the alveoli, so the tooth socket in the upper jaw, and grind out that socket until eventually the tooth could not grow in there, and that would shrink the tooth count by 1.
And let's see if I understand what you're saying. So this fourth lower incisor is the largest, like it is in crocodiles. And I can see daylight
Exactly.
through there, and there is sort of a missing tooth.
So if that tooth was overgrown, I'm not sure it's found within alligators. I know it is within crocodiles. If that tooth was overgrown, it would basically wear out this alveolus completely, and this tooth wouldn't be allowed to grow.
Okay.
And so that would bring the tooth count down by 1. And sometimes this tooth, in compensation, because this was completely destroyed, would become a little bit larger and start obstructing into this space.
Interesting. Very interesting. Okay.
Yeah. It takes the right team, because it's not that the scientists who supposed that Nanotyrannus was a juvenile T-Rex were bad scientists. I mean, Thomas Carr was the leading spearhead of this debate, and I think you'd be hard-pressed to talk to a scientist who was more thorough. I mean, his ontogeny of Jane, even if he reached potentially incorrect conclusions, his ontogeny is one of the most thorough and dedicated research papers I've ever read. It is, I mean, he is nitpicky and down to the wire with every single detail. And it's incredibly impressive. This doesn't mean paleontologists that were dissenting this before are stupid or wrong in every single thing, or that paleontology is wrong in every single thing we learn. We're just getting closer to the truth every time.
And so what the paper was talking about is how a lower tooth can come up and obstruct the growth of an upper tooth, but not a situation ever where the lower teeth would become larger over time and therefore crowd out other teeth.
Exactly. That's a fantastic way to put it. That is a fantastic way to put it. And so basically what we're seeing within crocodilians is that it's pathological. Not it's almost a scar. It's not something that happens naturally through growth. It's a bizarre mutation that then causes an injury in the animal, which causes it to lose a singular tooth. And even then, it's not as extreme as what we see within Tyrannosaurs. And on top of that, we now have several specimens of specifically Gorgosaurus and Tarbosaurus, which are two of T-Rex's other closest relatives, which we do have juveniles of. Very young, intermediate, and subadult, and adult. And what we see is consistent tooth counts throughout their entire growth. Now, sometimes we can see a little bit of variation, but what we've noticed is we see that in adults as well. It's not ontogenetic. It's not through growth. It's through individual variation, and we can see that in modern-day crocodiles and alligators as well. What that means is the tooth count isn't changing as they grow. It's changing from individual to individual.
And this would be a 25% change. Like I guess maybe a 20% reduction. which is a ton.
We're losing 3 to 4 teeth as it grows. And the tooth shape and, as we talked about earlier, the serration density is completely different. T-Rex's teeth are, as we talked about in one of our last videos, murder bananas. They are thick and fat and conical. They're not particularly sharp, and the serrations on them are massive, 2 to 3 times larger than what you see on a steak knife.
Yes.
But Nanotyrannus, while its teeth are still thicker than a lot of other dinosaur teeth, that's just by nature of being a tyrannosaur,
Yep.
they are a lot more laterally compressed, which means skinnier,
Okay.
with much finer serrations, something more similar to what we see within the allosaurs.
So, more of a steak knife.
More
less
of a steak
banana.
knife, less of a railroad spike. So those are, and I mean, that's on building on top of things like you talked about, like the orbit shape. But also, on top of all these things that we've talked about before, this newest study proposes several anatomical traits that have never been documented or noticed before
because we've got better
do
specimen
not
there.
change as the animal grows. If we look at Jane here, I'm going to lift her skull. You can actually see on this is called the jugal. This is called the quadrate. This funny bone in between them is called the quadratojugal. Now, if you look right here, you can see a specific pocket. That's called a quadratojugal pneumacity. This is only found in Nanotyrannus. It is not found in T-Rex. The quadratojugal on T-Rex does not have this little pit in it. That does not change as an animal grows. Same as things like the tooth count, tooth shape, which now we're realizing are only found in the embryology of the animal, so are coded before they've even grown those bones in the embryo of the animal. This is the same thing. This does not change as the animal grows. This hole does not fill in as an animal grows. On top of that, there is a subnarial foramen, which is basically a pit up here below the nares. The nares is a fancy word for the nostril. That basically feeds a bunch of blood flow and nerve endings and a bunch of other important stuff out to the end of the snout from the interior of the skull. Now, in T-Rex, we see that. In fact, in most tyrannosaurs, we see the presence of that. Nanotyrannus is one of the only, not only tyrannosaurs, but theropods that does not have this trait. And so, and again, that is something that does not change. That is preconditioned literally within the DNA of the animal. And you can look at baby crocodiles with skulls 2 inches long compared to a 2-foot adult skull, and those features will stay the same.
Yes.
So what that means is these are all traits that we do not see changing in modern day animals, so we should not see them changing in prehistoric animals.
Yeah.
These are almost natural laws.
So we've got changes that we don't see in anything extant, and we don't see in any other extinct
Tyrannosaur.
lineages. We have other tyrannosaurs that we can look at. All their growth stages. None of these things change. Tyrannosaurus would have to go through a Tyrannosaurus Rex would have to go through a metamorphosis, unlike anything else we
see within vertebrate.
Ever.
Within vertebrates, yes.
Yeah.
And so we talked about crocodilians. We've even talked about juvenile tyrannosaurs. The tooth count has been such a long and hard debate that I also want to bring up another species, another family called noasaurs. Now, noasaurs are a specific group of theropod dinosaurs of unknown origin. We are not exactly sure what they are, but we do know they are weird. This includes famous species like Machikosaurus, but there is a much more bizarre group of animals within noasaurs that completely lose their teeth as they grow. They, as juveniles, have teeth, and then they lose them and replace it with a beak as adults. So, again, this was talked about. Okay, dinosaurs are obviously changing their teeth as they grow. Nanotyrannus could be the same way. However, CT scans have shown that within that beak, they still have the same exact tooth counts as adults as they do have juveniles, just hidden under the sheath of that beak.
So the teeth are still there?
You can still see the alveoli.
Okay,
not
so
the empty sockets.
So the sockets
but
are
the socket count is
and
the
that's the
exact
biggest
same
thing.
as the juvenile.
Because socket count never changes. You can lose a tooth,
yes,
but the sockets stay.
Never change. Exactly.
Okay.
So again, this suggests that this is to get Nanotyrannus to T-Rex would have to break some level of natural law, because we do not see that in any other dinosaurs or any other extant animals.
Awesome.
And then on top of that, we circle back to Bloody Mary, who not only has the most complete skull and showed us a lot of this, but is now known to be a fully mature adult between the age of 20 to 22 years old.
So the other ones we have are still growing.
Yes, Jane included. The Cleveland skull is also still growing. The Bloody Mary is a fully mature adult.
And that's significant because still smaller.
Still smaller than T-Rex by a third, if not more. Bloody Mary is a little over 15 feet long, nearing on 20, and weighed over half a ton. T-Rex could get in the ballpark of 45 feet long and weigh nearly 10 tons.
Yes.
So it is a massive size difference. And we know that, as we were mentioning earlier, because of histology. So what that basically means is they took a very, very thin slice of one of the thick limb bones, like the femur, the upper thigh bone, in Bloody Mary, and they looked at it under a microscope. Now, animals, especially wild animals, even in animals that live in very humid and hot climates that are consistent, during the summer and winter months, you see climactic change. Mm-hmm. And so resources become scarce, and then they become a lot more open. And what that means is during the warmer months, again, even in very hot, warm climates, we see that they are packing on a lot more protein, calcium, all that stuff, and they're growing a lot more rapidly, and that slows down. And animals will grow more intensely during those time periods and then slow down. So what that means is you can count the rings in their limb bones like tree rings and see how much they are growing. Now, what we should also see is as they get older and reach maturity, they're not growing as quickly. So as you reach the external skin of the bone, you'll see those rings become packed way more densely. And I'm not just talking twice as dense. I'm talking visibly more dense. If you pull up a picture of that paper, they have Bloody Mary's histology, and you can see it. Mm-hmm. And that is a definitive sign that they are not growing as quickly because they are reaching their sexually mature size. And what that means is most reptiles do grow continuously, at least to some extent, until they die. Yeah. However, it's a bell curve. It's way more plateaued and limited and much slower than from their adolescence to their adulthood. And so that's kind of the bar standard for knowing an animal is sexually and physiologically mature. Yeah. And Bloody Mary in histology is a mature adult animal and is substantially smaller than T-Rex. But the other wrinkle within the story is Bloody Mary is also smaller than Jane, while also being nearly 10 years older.
Wow.
So what that means is that Bloody Mary and Jane are also two separate species. So not only is Nanotyrannus back, but it's two individual species. We have Nanotyrannus lancensis, which is the holotype species, the Cleveland skull, Bloody Mary, and then we have Jane, Nanotyrannus lithaeus, which is now its own new species and refers to the Greek-Roman myth of souls drinking the water from the river, I think, Leith, and that basically made them forget their past lives so that they could be reincarnated. Mm-hmm. So Jane is now shedding all of the past baggage of her identity and moving on to her new identity as a new species of Nanotyrannus.
Well, that is incredible. And, I mean, obviously, this clears up this one debate about whether or not Nanotyrannus was a unique genera from Tyrannosaurus. But that's not where this ends, is it? Anytime that we have Ethan here, we have an extensive conversation about things outside of just what you see in this video. And most of you will never get to see that. However, for a few of you, our Stinkin' Rad fans on Patreon, you know you get that as a whole separate video every week, and this one's a doozy. So if you're interested in seeing that video or just supporting us making more content like this, please consider checking out our Patreon. What else do you think we should draw from this paper? And also, like, What else does this change about paleontology as a whole?
I think that's a fantastic question because we've talked a lot today about, specifically me. I've been yapping. I'm sorry, but
I'm sure everybody's furious.
We've talked a lot today about how this is maybe one of the more important papers that has come out within paleontology in a long time. And the reason is because it changes three major topics that as we understood them. Firstly, it changes everything we knew about Tyrannosaur ontogeny, specifically within T-Rex. So T-Rex, all T-Rex ontogenetic research has been based around the idea that the juveniles were the Nanotyrannus specimens. AKA, there was this concept that T-Rex was almost completely unique in its ecology as well as its physiology, in that as it grew, it would fill different niches within the ecosystem. As babies, it was maybe like an insectivore, taking down small lizards and insects and very small prey. And then as it reached teenage size, it was taking down things like pachycephalosaurs and ornithomimosaurs and the fast-moving lightweight prey. And then as an adult, it was taking down the larger armored prey like Triceratops and Kylosaurus and Edmontosaurus.
And as a consequence, there was no room
for anything else.
Yes.
Exactly. And so that's out the window now. And so all of our research that we've done over the last 20, 30 years is out the window on T-Rex ontogeny. In fact, as it stands, T-Rex growth, besides the very earliest stages and adulthood, is kind of a big question mark now. It's a completely open field, and I encourage anyone who's interested in paleontology, this is an open area to explore. This is something unknown. We have one good specimen coming up called Teen Rex, which is on display at the Denver Museum of Nature and Science, which is probably our only idea of an adolescent T-Rex. And beyond that, we're kind of left in the lurch here. So it changes everything we know about that, for one. Then number two, it also changes our idea about ecology at the end of the Cretaceous period. For a long time, and in fact a lot of your watchers may have even seen this, that there's this idea that dinosaurs were already going extinct. Their diversity was lower before their great extinction at the end of the Cretaceous. They were already on their way out. And a big part of that argument was that we don't see middle-sized predators in mid-sized predators in the late Cretaceous. Nanotyrannus is that.
Yes.
And then, lastly, it changes what we know about Tyrannosaur evolution. Nanotyrannus is not only its own genus and two new species, again, Nanotyrannus lencensis and Nanotyrannus lithaeus, but it is also its own new group called Nanotyrannidae. It is not even a Tyrannosauridae member. It is a Eutyrannosaur. So outside of pretty much all the other tyrannosaurs that you probably think of, like T-Rex, Tarbosaurus, Gorgosaurus, Daspletosaurus, Albertosaurus, Lythronax, all of those guys, it's outside of all of them. And what's really interesting is this one analysis even suggested that it should be nested within the eastern tyrannosaurs, which are a completely mysterious group from very fragmentary remains. And that includes animals like Dryptosaurus and Appalachiosaurus. And so what that could potentially mean is that as the Western Seaway that was splitting North America in half receded towards the end of the Cretaceous, these mid-sized predators were migrating into T-Rex's territory. Now, this is an important question mark here. I've talked about this, but this is something that needs further research to prove. This was one analysis out of several that suggested this. And so I think it's important, again, that if you guys are interested in paleontology, if we have people who are watching and subscribers that want to get into paleontology, this is an open research field that we have some evidence for, but needs to be researched more. And on top of all of that, I also think it's important to talk about what this means for the broader scope of paleontology, in that I saw so many people who were almost treating Nanotyrannus like Bigfoot. Like it was this cryptid, it wasn't real, and you were silly to believe it ever existed, right? But paleontology is ever changing. It's not that we are making stuff up or flying off the seat of our pants. It's that we are constantly learning more. We're getting closer to the truth, and we need the right team of people making the right conclusions with the right specimens to get this truth.
You're working with the evidence available to you.
Exactly.
And that is how science always functions.
And so I think it's so important not to entertain conspiracy theories and all of those things, but to be open-minded that sometimes the consensus is not always correct. Sometimes the most recent paper is not the correct one.
Yes.
It changes. And it's important to read the research for yourself, to come to your own conclusions, to talk to other scientists and have a wide dialogue. That's why we have the peer review process, is to get feedback and a back and forth, a dialogue going, and not ivory tower other people out and kind of outgroup people because they disagree with you. This is a very, I feel, a large problem within the society of paleontology.
I think within society as a whole.
Yes, and Nanotyrannus just stands as a testament to that, because not only is it here, it's likely here to stay.
Yes.
This time. So I think that's how we see a shift within paleontology.
Well, this has been extraordinarily informative. I feel very much like I understand this subject. I agree with you. We've got, looks to be 2 species. And I gotta mention just one thing that makes me very happy. Because, well, they're not Tyrannosaurus rex, they're also not Tyrannosaurids. Which means that the video we made a couple of years ago, exploring all of the Tyrannosaurids, looking for the smallest of the Tyrannosaurids, still valid.
Yep, stands true.
For the record, there are a couple of other major controversies in paleontology having to do with things like lips on Tyrannosaurus rex, or the relationship between Pachycephalosaurus and Stygimoloch and Dracorex. I don't know necessarily what the answers are to these questions, but Ethan might. However, he's not allowed to talk about them just yet, but someday he will be. And if you want to find out the answers to these questions when we're allowed to talk about such things, probably subscribe and click the little bell so you find out when those videos come. What can you tell me about dinosaur mummies?
What isn't there to tell about dinosaur mummies? I mean, can you be matched with a cooler fossil? It's those have given us our best idea of dinosaur life appearance of anything. I mean, who would have known that Edmontosaurus had a stupid little hat if it wasn't for dinosaur mummies? Who would have known what Psittacosaurus's cloaca looked like if it wasn't for dinosaur mummies? Who would have known what dinosaur skin and feathers and everything would have looked like if it wasn't for dinosaur mummies? That's the answer to the warm-blooded versus cold-blooded debate, is finding a 4-chambered heart of a dinosaur within a mummy.
Holy cow.
Dinosaur mummies have...
Which makes absolute sense, because everything they're nested within has a 4-chambered heart. But still, it's incredible.
Dinosaur mummies have time and time again changed our perspective of what dinosaurs looked like, and even sometimes behaved, just over and over and over again, because it's something that I like to tell people that we can learn so much more from the bones than you would ever expect. I just gave you how long of a video of us discussing how, just based off the bones, we figured all this information out. We can get, I would say, within the 70 to 80% mark of a dinosaur's life appearance just based off the bones. We can map almost the entire muscle system and the internal organs and everything just off the bones. However, there's still a gray area there, and mummies answer that question. Mummies show us what dinosaurs looked like and answer some other questions about how they looked, behaved, acted, that we would never know without them. They are an immensely important fossil, and I mean, can you get more gemstone among gemstones within fossils?
Well, I tell you what, I was planning to talk about dinosaur mummies next week anyway. Would you be willing to come back next week and talk to us about dinosaur mummies?
I'll see you back here.
All right. Hope to see you as well. As always, like and subscribe, and hope to see you real soon.
That fossil is 1 in a million amongst 1 in a billion. Like,
And just if any of you know her, please tell Candace Owens that this was found by a farmer, and it's one of the raddest double dinosaur skeletons of all time.
and it has completely shifted paleontology.
You can decide if you want to leave that or not. No, have you seen this?
Yeah.
So you know what I'm talking
We
about.
talked about it
Does
before.
she when she thinks about it, it's bad vibes.
Well, but one of her strongest reasons for not believing in dinosaurs is why
that
are they
no one
always
else
found by
finds-
the paleontologists? Only ever the paleontologists. So often, it is a rancher or a group of kids or whatever that stumble into them.
It was the Denver Museum of Nature and Science was literally just coring into their parking lot to figure out if they could do a geothermal energy source, and they pulled it up and found a dinosaur bone in their drill coil.
That's the
like-
best thing.
Yeah, it's Hell Creek too. But it's 150 feet below the surface. Stupid.
So anyway,
Anyways,
you can keep that or not, but I do want to address that at some point. That's wild. Anyway, who would win a fight between Tyrannosaurus Rex, an adult mature T-Rex?
Oh, sorry.
And, yeah, I agree. And 10 Velociraptors.
What's that meme? Hydrogen bomb versus coughing baby. This is like asking who would win between a saltwater crocodile and 10 really angry Yorkies. This is a similar debate, and I just can't see any way.
Well, I appreciate your feedback, but I did read in a book that 10 Velociraptors would win, so you're wrong.
Sounds like a bad book.
I'll not sit by and listen to this.
But that would make birds reptiles, and I'm like, correct, and they're like, no, and that's just.
We've never bumped into that controversy ever. So they had to go get some.
Hold on. The probe is from whale aliens?
They're called whalians.
No.
No. The probe is from aliens that had, I think, come at various times and communicated with the whales.
I love aliens so much.